Good morning, everyone. I hope you're keeping well. I don't know if you remember things in school like metalwork and woodwork. I don't know if you ended up doing either of those things. I absolutely despise those lessons, those metalwork and woodwork lessons, because I'm not a very practical man. I'm a creative man, not a practical man. And so, whilst all my school friends in class seem to enjoy those blokish type things like metalwork and woodwork, I absolutely hate them. I couldn't wait for the lesson to end. Well, one day I remember that we were doing in metalwork, we were going to make a key fob and give it to somebody we loved or cared for. And basically, the system was that we were given a sheet of metal. We had to cut the metal out, shape it into a sort of a roundish sort of shape, lemon sort of shape, with filing and all that. Punch a hole in the middle, put a design around the edge, and put the person's name, actually stamp it with lettered stamps on the actual key fob itself, a metal key fob. So all my class were doing it, and they were doing a brilliant job, and they were doing all the file cutting and the filing and the little pattern round and the hole punch and the name, and they all looked so good. Well, mine just looked terrible. I did the cut, but I did the cut a bit too fat, so it took me ages and ages to file it down. So there were big file scars on the fob, which I couldn't get rid of, which looked terrible. Little bits of metal sticking up and everything. And then the little pattern on the side, which you had to do with this tiny little machine, just looked terrible. It was up and down and imprecise. Also, the metal itself was just too fat to be a key fob. It just looked like a key fob that Barney Rubble would have had, really. I couldn't get the hole punch right, so I punched a hole and it didn't quite go right through, so I punched another hole. So you had sort of two holes, a smaller one and a bigger one. And then the name, which I was gonna give the fob to my dad, was supposed to be A.E. James, but I couldn't quite get the weight right, so it came up as A.F. Janes. And it just looked terrible. And as was always the case in metalwork or woodwork or any of those crafts, I was the worst in the class by some distance. I think they would have done a special award for me for being terrible at those kind of things. So self-consciously, I got this terrible, terrible, clubby sort of key fob, and I gave it to my dad, and he sort of said, "Oh, thanks." And that was about 1974, 1975. And would you believe that was the key fob that my dad had on his keyring right up to his death in the 1990s? I suppose a lot of maybe his friends gave him a little bit of stick over it and said, "Albie, what are you doing with that key fob? It looks absolutely terrible. It doesn't even, it doesn't even say your name properly. It says A.F. Janes." And I bet my dad said, "Yeah, it's true, but you know what? My son made that. And I really like it. I like the fact that my son made it." And as I say, that was the key fob my dad had on his keys right up to his death in the 1990s. Would my dad have had a key fob made by anyone else? Maybe somebody who could really do a good job and make it look professional, 1,000 times better than the key ring that I gave him? No, he wouldn't have wanted that. He wanted the key ring from his son, the fat, awkward key ring with two little holes, bad punches, and A.F. James instead of A.E. James. He was proud of it because I was his son. Really, when we come to the Father, we must realize that He loves us, and all He ever asks of us is to be ourselves. He doesn't expect us to be someone else or try to be someone else. The Father's just looking for His children to be His children. So remember that today. Remember that when we're trying to strive for excellence in all we do for God. I think it's a good thing to strive for excellence. Sometimes God just looks at what we've done, smiles and says, "Oh, that's great. It may not be the greatest thing in the world, but it came from my child."